probably more than anybody alive. He is the brilliant political correspondent of the Sunday Times, John Boothman. Welcome, John.
How are you doing, Kevin?
Good to have you on board. Well, first of all, let's talk about the story that's making the headlines all over the country, the end of the marriage of Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell. I don't want to go into the personal details, but do you detect that with Peter Murrell's trial for embezzlement from the SNP coming up, that Nicola would rather distance herself from this guy while he goes through the very public ordeal of a court case?
There's a lot of speculation of that nature. We don't actually know yet whether Peter Murrell is going to be on trial. What's happened to him is he's been charged. He was charged, last April, May. We're waiting for the Crown Office to decide whether it's in the public interest for there to be a trial and to decide what the next moves are. Equally, we're also waiting to see what happens with Nicola Sturgeon. She was arrested and then not just released without charge. Oh, goodness, what are we talking about? June 2023. So we don't know what's happening in that. All we know is that she's still under investigation. She's under investigation. The former treasurer of the party, Colin Beattie, who's a member of the Scottish Party, the SNP and the Scottish Parliament, is still under investigation. But we don't know what's happening next with them. So there's a lot of stuff we don't know. What we certainly do know is that this is taking an awful long time, and that's caused a great deal of puzzlement to not just commentators, but, you know, everyone in Scotland who wants to know what's going to happen with these people. You're right, this investigation, 11 policemen involved, policemen, policewomen involved in that started in July 2021. The investigation goes on. As I say, we're waiting on the Crown Office to decide what happens with Murrell, who's been charged now. It wasn't any surprise to most people in the political firmament, that announcement yesterday. You know, none of Nicola Sturgeon's friends and allies were surprised by it, but it's happened. As you rightly said, I mean, this was a couple who were at the height of the political powers, probably in 2015. She, the First Minister of Scotland, the election, a general election in 2015, returned 56 SNP MPs. He ran that election because he was the chief executive of the SNP and a bit of a magician in terms of, you know, running the election machine. They won 56 seats. Labour won 1, the Tories won 1, and the Liberal Democrats won 1. And what happened after that was kind of went all downhill after that. They had that fundraising campaign to raise money for a second independence referendum. It raised more than £600,000. You know, it got to that position, as I said earlier, in July 2021, and the police ordered an investigation after complaints about the whereabouts of that money. You know, it played out, as we know. You know, who can forget a couple of years ago, I think what we're talking about, you know, when in 2023, when we had that big blue tent in the garden, we had the camper van being found at Peter Murrell's mother-in-law's house. I mean, one of the questions people were jokingly asking yesterday is, if there's going to be a divorce, who gets custody of the camper van? But that was a bit of a joke.
Yeah, which I think was worth 110 grand or something, wasn't it? Well, let me ask you this, John. I mean, I'm not au fait with the way the legal system works up there. I mean, and the wheels of justice throughout the country, down here as well as up there, you know, are run notoriously slowly. But what is going on with Murrell? I mean, down here, you get charged, you're going to court. Come what may. You seem to say that maybe he might not go to court. And why has it taken, after he was charged, what did you say, how long ago was that, 8 months ago or something?
Yes, last May he was charged, and basically what happened was a file went to the Crown Office, right? Prosecutors are looking at that file to decide what to do next. They need to decide, legally they need to decide, one, has a crime been committed, right? Having looked at that.
Well, if he's been charged, though, John.
He's been charged by the police, but the Crown Office have to decide, has a crime been committed? The Crown Office also has to decide, is the person who is being accused of that crime, is that the person who is liable to have done it? And they have to decide, is it in the public interest that this goes to court? And since then, it's been sitting on the desk of the prosecutors at the Crown Office, and there's been nothing. There are now questions being raised by prominent KCs in Scotland, prominent King's Councils, as to whether Peter Murrell can actually have a fair trial, because this has gone on so long and his human rights may have been breached.
Of course. Human rights, eh? What about Nicola then? I mean, since this case seems to be progressing so slowly, presumably she's far from off the hook yet. I mean, she could still get charged and could still end up in court. So we're waiting for some kind of verdict on her as well.
So what happened with Nicola? Let's take you back in February 2023. Right, let me get the dates right. February 2023, she resigned as First Minister. Basically, in June of the same year, she was arrested, questioned for 7 hours by the police. She was released without charge. She continues, of course, to protest her innocence. But ever since then, she's continued to be under investigation as part of this Operation Branchform. And whenever you go to the police or the Crown Office, they repeat the same statement, which says she's still under investigation by the police.
Interesting. Now, I believe she's actually currently staying at a flat owned by the famous crime thriller writer Val McDermott, who's an old colleague of mine, actually. We worked together on a newspaper, so she's a great girl, old Val. So I'm sure that Nicola has a nice place to stay. But politically, there they are together. Politically, John, how is the SNP faring now? I mean, frankly, Nicola Sturgeon left it in a complete mess with her absurd wokery, putting blokes, rapist males into female jails. The Scottish people just said enough. So she left them in a terrible state. Then they got Humza Useless, who plunged it into an even worse state due to this crazed wokery that I don't think strikes a chord with the famously common sense Scottish people at all. So she plunged them downhill there. John Swinney now is doing his best, but he faces a very different political landscape to what she did, and indeed Humza Yousaf. He's got the Tories are nipping at his heels, the Labour are coming up. I mean, the SNP grip on Scotland is slipping, isn't it?
Look, you're correct that Nicola Sturgeon left the party in a state. They had a disastrous 13 months under Humza Yousaf. He was a complete disaster. Then what happened was 6 weeks before the general election, Swinney took over. He tried to steady the ship, but they got absolutely hammered at that general election. They lost 39 seats. They've only got 9 seats now in the House of Commons, with Labour in the mid-30s. What's now happening, though, is the landscape, the tectonic plates are shifting again, because the disaster, the ineptitude that's been, Keir Starmer's first 6 or 7 months has led to a position where basically Anas Sarwar and Scottish Labour have gone backwards at a rate of knots, and the beneficiaries of that have been the SNP. I mean, it's terribly ironic that what's happened is that, you know, the budget, which gave lots of extra public spending to Scotland and to the Scottish government, has actually provided a big boost for John Swinney and has been a complete and utter disaster for Anas Sarwar. So, for example, in the latest polls, you've got the SNP at about 30-odd percent, 33%, Labour in the low 20s, which is a complete reversal to what happened, you know, really at the general election, where Labour were far ahead of the SNP. But of course, like everywhere else in the country, the people who are making the biggest gains in the opinion polls look like the Reform Party. And that's not just hitting the Conservative Party in Scotland, it's also hitting Labour as well.
That's fascinating. So Reform are a real force up there as well. They seem to be seriously on the march. Last question, John. Where is Scottish independence in all this? That seems to have taken a back seat. I would imagine John Swinney's priority is to try to, shall we say, re-persuade the Scottish people that the SNP can be a party of sensible government, because she, old Nicola, was just obsessed with independence. I don't entirely blame her for that, but at the expense of competent government and at the expense of ludicrous wokery that undermined the entire party. Presumably, Swinney's mission is to persuade the Scottish public that this is a sensible party that can govern.
A couple of things worth saying. Independence, you're right, has been in the back burner. But independence in the polls, despite the fact, as I say, the SNP has gone up and down in the polls, is actually, you know, at the moment polling probably just above 50%. But look, it's not on the agenda at the moment, but that's what makes the election in May 2026 so critical, because if Swinney can take the SNP back into power in 2026, which would mean, by the way, that they're there until 2031, having first been elected in 2007. That in itself would be incredible. But not just that. If Starmer's government doesn't improve, if Sarwar can't win and Swinney is back in power in 2026, independence is back up the agenda in Scotland again. And that's something that I think people south of the border certainly think has gone for, well, maybe a very long time. Well, maybe not so much. And that's what people will need to watch.
Fascinating, fascinating. John, thank you so much for the time. Great to talk to you.